My friends, the perfect Charizard score in Pokémon Snap is impossible, and here's why. Yes, you heard that right. Despite the best speedrunners and high-score gamers trying for decades, no one has ever pulled off the perfect theoretical Charizard score in Pokémon Snap. Charizard is certainly one of the most iconic Pokémon of all, and it's no surprise that he appears as a snappable Pokémon in Pokémon Snap. Actually, what may be a surprise is that Charizard is the only evolution among the starter Pokémon who does appear in the game. Pikachu, Squirtle, Bulbasaur, they all appear, but none of their evolutions do, whereas we get the entire tree of Charmander, Charmeleon, and Charizard. And so the pursuit of the perfect Charizard score has been something long sought as a remarkable goal among Pokémon Snap high score players, but even after 23 years, still no one has managed to pull it off. Let me explain. Half of the intrigue around Charizard's theoretical perfect score is that it should very intuitively be possible. He's not a Pokemon where you get the bonus for multiples of the same, like Charmander or Squirtle, and this adds a level of insane complexity to a score where you can almost always squeeze in a few more bonus points into the frame. But Charizard is not like that at all. There's just the one Charizard, so it's simple enough to see where the score should be, how you could max out size, pose, and technique, and just exactly what a perfect Charizard Snap would look like. To really understand how a singular Pokemon like Charizard is scored, let's look at a couple of similar ones first. Dragonite is a great and simple example. The ideal Dragonite shot requires catching him in his ideal pose, which in this case is simply when he comes out of the whirlpool, flies up into the air, stops for a moment, and roars. This pose gets 1200 points, and it's his one and only sort of bonus above 1000 scoring pose available. Yes, you can get other poses, him first emerging, him flying away, but these just score less than 1000 points and aren't worth considering. You have to catch him in his roaring animation. Then you also want him to fill up the frame entirely and nicely. Not too big, not too small, just right. In this case, you'll want 1000 size points. I mean, that's pretty much always the case. You always want 1000 size points, which is the maximum possible. This 1000 size gets added to the 1200 pose for 2200 points, and then this gets doubled thanks to good technique, which just amounts to it being well framed and centered, for a grand total of 4400 points. Dragonite is very forgiving, and it's incredibly easy just to walk your way into 4400 points, even if it was one of your first times playing the game. Over 100 people have submitted this perfect Dragonite score to Cyberscore, and I'd bet a good 30 to 50% of the 2 million people who ever played the game got this score on their cartridge, whether they knew it was a perfect tied world record or not. A more difficult but similar style of score might be Sandslash, where you must catch him in the perfect animation of jumping out of the ground before he fully lands back down, which is a pose worth 1400 points. Combined with the perfect 1000 size, and doubling this from good technique, we get a score of 4800 points. This one is a good deal harder to snap. It's not insanely difficult, but the timing of the pitcher as well as your position in relation to the moment Sandslash emerges and lands has to be a lot more precise. Only about 80 people have submitted the perfect score for Sandslash to Cyberscore, so it is harder than a perfect Dragonite. And while I do believe something like 50% of people who ever played the game might have inadvertently scored the perfect Dragonite in their 90s playthroughs, you would have to at least try a handful of attempts to get the perfect Sandslash, and know what you're doing going for the high score. It would take some planning and practice, and so I'd bet a much lower number of people, probably less than 5% of the millions who played the game back in the day, ever scored the perfect Sandslash. It's not hard by any means, but a lot of the casual gamers simply aren't driven that way to try the few dozen times it would take to get the perfect Sandslash. But of course, pro gamers, speedrunners, and high score gamers are a different breed, always looking to max out the scores and get the optimal run no matter the cost, even if it takes hundreds of hours, thousands of attempts, and PhD level study and analysis. And that's where a more complex Pokemon like Charizard comes into the picture. So let's get into it. When it comes to Charizard, you've got to knock this Charmeleon into the lava pit which he's ominously running around, using an apple or a pester ball. This takes a bit of timing, and Charmeleon's movement in regards to when he runs fast, stops to roar, or walks slowly is luck-based. It doesn't matter too much though, you'll knock him in, you have more than enough time to do so, and then he evolves into Charizard. Charizard pops right up, but this isn't his best pose yet. You can throw a pester ball at him, and he doesn't quite get knocked out, but he gets pretty bothered, and this is not a high-scoring pose either. You need to specifically throw an apple at Charizard so that he gets bumped, gets angry, and roars, shooting fire at you. What a flame, Professor Oak says. This is the best pose, worth 1250 points. It's extremely forgiving in terms of which part of the animation you must capture to get the 1250 points. You can even catch him just a moment after he begins to take a deep fiery breath, and this will count just fine. The same it'll count at the peak of his flame. They're all 1250 points. And so, you may have figured out by now, if you're able to score a 1000 size Charizard, plus 1250 for the roaring pose, plus the 2x for a well-framed shot, that would be 4500 points. And it would be the perfect Charizard score. Yet, after 23 years and countless passionate high-score gamers attempting to get the 4500 point Charizard, no one has ever been able to do it. And it actually may be impossible. So here's why. First, you should know we're painstakingly close to getting this perfect Charizard. The world record, which 23 people have submitted to Cyberscore, is 4480. The earliest submission of the score dates back to 2009, and it was probably actually achieved even earlier than that. So we've been stuck at 4480 forever. The score breaks down to the typical 1250 roaring flame pose, plus 990 on the size score. Literally just 10 points off the perfect score, and 10 points is the smallest increment in Pokémon Snap on N64. The 990 size comes just as Charizard cranes his neck upwards, taking in a deep breath moments before blasting out fire towards you. This still counts as his What a Flame pose worth the 1250 points, but we've only been able to get a 990 size, and this is the biggest and best size we can find. It's tantalizing how close we are to getting the theoretical perfect Charizard score. One more iota of size and we'd have it. But ever since the game came out in 1999, no one has been able to do it. Why not? At the core of the problem is that Charizard is a pretty big Pokemon, and you mostly pass too close to him to get a full 1000 point score. The game always feels like you're leaving out parts of Charizard from the shot, deducting some size points. Also, the end spawn of the course is right here, just after the Charizard encounter, so you can't wait any longer to take the shot. If you could, you might be able to get just far enough away to nab the 1000 score, but there's no known way to delay leaving the stage. Once you cross this threshold, you're taken out of the stage back to the photograph processing menu. You'll notice the best Charizard scores are snapped just before getting despawned from the stage, within a frame or two of leaving the level. This clip is from AMW, who has achieved numerous untied high-score world records in Pokémon Snap over the past couple of years. Here he is using a setup he likes, going for the Charizard world record. You can see he just barely gets off the snap in time before being taken into the despawn point at the end of the level. So you can see we're just barely getting far enough away from Charizard to get the 990 point score. Any closer and we get a little bit less. So fair enough, we can't quite get far enough away before the level ends to get a 1000 sized Charizard. So what if we try to take the picture as early as possible instead? Well, this is certainly doable as well. It takes a bit of luck to get Charmeleon in a perfect spot right away, and a great throw to knock him in immediately, but you can slow yourself down, throw the apple, take the pick, and you're further away than we are at the end of the stage. I actually messed around with this a fair bit using a Game Shark code to stop your cart in its tracks, which is usually not possible. It's a huge advantage cheat since you can take your time to set up shots and study the subject carefully. And I found from this spot I was mostly getting Charizard sizes in the 920 or 930 range, but no better. It just doesn't seem like there's an angle or shot here that captures a 1000 size Charizard. Maybe it's possible, but no one has found the exact angle or shot yet. This is kind of counterintuitive, right? Because it seems like we're far enough away to snap a pretty complete picture of Charizard, so what else is at work here? Well, there are two important mechanics to keep in mind. One is this strange thing called the square head theory, and this one gets pretty technical, so buckle up. Take a look at these two photos of Diglett. Despite being taken on the same frame of animation with the same pose score, the one on the right scores slightly higher. Why? Well, counterintuitively, it's because it's less centered. I know, this goes against the requirement which is literally needed for the score to get doubled, but in a nutshell, the less centered your subject is in the photo, the bigger its size will be, and of course, the higher the score, so long as it's centered enough that Professor Oak will still double the score for technique. This can get fussy and you can miss it or hit it within a pixel or two to the left or right, and Oak is more lenient on some Pokemon and harsher on others. Look at these Vileplume pics. Same pose, same frame, yet the less centered one gets the higher size score, resulting in the higher overall score. Of course, the completely uncentered one would get a lower score since it wouldn't get the double points, but you get the idea. It's believed this has to do with a perspective thing where by turning your head, which is quite square like a classic N64 head, you can get a little closer to the subject of the photo. There's this whole Google document explaining it in even more detail, which I'll link in the description, but I think the photo examples pretty much speak for themselves. So in theory, if you get a little further away from Charizard, having him a little less centered in the photograph, could this possibly result in finally achieving the 1000 size perfect Charizard score? Well, in theory, sure. However, he's so big and takes up so much of the frame that there's just no space left in the photograph to make this happen without cutting out even more of Charizard from the frame, which of course would lose more points than we stand to gain. You know, he's quite a lot bigger than a Diglett or a Butterfree, so it simply can't work this way. I tried a fair bit from this far distance shot, and I just didn't have any luck getting any sort of significant improvement. A second factor in the inability to get a 1000 size Charizard could simply be the fact that half of him is under the lava. It's impossible to know exactly how the game does or does not compensate for the fact that not all of him is visible. Maybe we are getting a perfectly framed shot, but the 10 points missing are simply missing because his legs are underneath the lava. A good similar example is that of Snorlax. The world record Snorlax picture only has a size of 830, which is the biggest we can get. He actually looks kind of small in the frame here, but if we get a closer, bigger shot, we actually get fewer size points. I know, it's really counterintuitive and mysterious, and we'll probably never fully understand it, but that's just the way it is. Look, it could be worse. The size score on the world record for Lapras is a mere 530 points. It's a combination of us not being able to get closer, plus some of Lapras being hidden under the water. I mean, who knows entirely? Then again, Gyarados is an example of a Pokemon where we can get 1000 size, despite a ton of him being hidden underwater. So maybe the amount of Pokemon hidden by the water or lava has absolutely nothing to do with anything. Making matters even worse is that no one has ever been able to crack Pokémon Snap from a tool-assisted point of view. There are no TASs of the game at all. The emulation just doesn't work well, and no one has ever been able to examine the game with these tools in the way that we examine other games to help us solve these deep mysteries. I don't know why that is. The technical stuff is a bit beyond my pay grade, but if you're a technical, tool-assisted emulator wizard, please take a look and let me know what you find. I think the reason the perfect Charizard is so intriguing is simply that we're so close, and we have been so close for so long. If the world record Charizard had a size score similar to Snorlax of 830 points, and that's all we could do, it wouldn't be so close, so believable that maybe we could squeeze out just a little bit more. But maybe, just maybe, the harsh reality is that there is simply no angle, no approach, no line possible that will ever result in the 1000 size Charizard, and thus 4500 perfect score. Maybe it's just not in the game. AMW has spent several dozen hours grinding out attempts in hopes of just getting lucky one time and finding the 1000 size spot. He's racked up hundreds of 4480 duplications, but never a 4500, so that's certainly not too encouraging. But then again, even though the physical odds may be against us, it seems as though in these old 90s video games, the community more often than not eventually finds a way. My friends, is Charizard 4500 possible? The perfect Charizard score in Pokemon Snap? Well, not today, but only time will tell, and at least I truly hope so. I eagerly await the day when someone will find just the tiniest thing that they'll go to Professor Oak with their Pokemon Snap, present it to him, and he'll score it with 1000 size, 1250 pose, and doubled for 4500. The perfect Charizard score. Until that day, my friends, stay true, and I'll see you in the next stream or video.